It is time for us to realize that we're too great a nation to limit ourselves to small dreams. We're not, as some would have us believe, doomed to an inevitable decline. Let us begin an era of national renewal. Let us renew our determination, our courage, and our strength. And let us renew our faith and our hope. We have every right to dream heroic dreams.
It was with that challenge that Ronald Reagan launched his presidency, and the drive to realize his dream of an America that would be, in his words, a shining city on a hill. At 69, he was the oldest man ever elected president, by an unexpectedly large margin over incumbent Democrat Jimmy Carter. And his inauguration occurred at an electric moment in American history. Just 36 minutes after he took the oath of office, word flashed across the country that a flight had lifted off from Iranian soil, carrying 52 Americans to freedom, after 144 days as hostages of Iran.
Some 30 minutes ago, the planes bearing our prisoners left Iranian airspace and are now free of Iran.
But less than 2 months after his inaugural declaration of hope and confidence in America, it appeared his dreams had been shattered. He was wounded by one of 6 shots fired as he left a Washington hotel after addressing labor leaders. Doctors removed a bullet that had lodged 1 inch from his heart, and the man who had so narrowly escaped death was able to joke about it. When his wife Nancy arrived at the hospital shortly after the shooting, Reagan told her, "Honey, I forgot to duck." Just before he went under the knife, he looked at his surgeons and said, "Please tell me you're all Republicans." And when he came out of surgery, he quoted the comedian W.C. Fields and quipped, "All things considered, I'd rather be in Philadelphia." When Reagan displayed that grace and courage of a true, self-assured Hollywood hero, it became a defining moment that lifted him into a stronger, early position of leadership.
What are you going to do when you get home? Sit down.
When Reagan came into office, the affection was there that Eisenhower had, but there was no sense of personal courage. The shooting changed that. People saw Reagan with all of the handlers and the PR masters and everything like that stripped away. They saw him as he truly was. They had a glimpse of him as true character, and I think they felt that there was a man with true grit.
He was back on the job within a month. And with Congress and the nation behind him, he began to implement his program.
I have come to speak to you tonight about our economic recovery program and why I believe it's essential that the Congress approve this package, which I believe will lift the crushing burden of inflation off of our citizens and restore the vitality to our economy.
He put forward a radical program of tax cuts and military spending increases. He fought to reduce the size of government and cut social programs. He tried to curb liberal judicial activism. It was called the Reagan Revolution. His first 2 years in office brought the deepest recession since the Great Depression of the 1930s. But with his tax cuts and spending reductions in place, the economy slowly recovered. That recovery was helped by forces he didn't really control. Oil prices fell sharply, so did inflation. With that, the Federal Reserve could drive down interest rates and inflation even further. The tax cuts fueled consumer spending, and a period of history-making prosperity followed.
Tonight, we can take pride in 25 straight months of economic growth, the strongest in 34 years.
And that recovery confirmed his belief in the power of free market capitalism.
What I want to see above all is that this country remains a country where someone can always get rich. That's the thing that we have and that must be preserved.
Ronald Reagan came to the presidency a passionate Cold Warrior. He sent more than 8,000 American troops to the tiny Caribbean island nation of Grenada. Several hundred Cubans were overwhelmed, and the Marxist government there was overthrown.
I now present to you our own national hero, our own rescuer after God, Ronald Reagan, President of the United States of America.
Battleships and Marines were sent to Lebanon in an ill-fated attempt to block the chances for Soviet meddling there. When more than 240 American Marines died when a suicide bomber drove a truckload of explosives into their barracks, and the limits of U.S. military power became embarrassingly clear, he cut his losses and withdrew.
They are our brothers, these freedom fighters, and we owe them our help. I've spoken recently of the freedom fighters of Nicaragua. They are the moral equal of our founding fathers.
With Washington's support, Contra rebels fought vainly to topple Nicaragua's communist-leaning government. But Afghanistan's U.S.-backed Mujahideen succeeded in throwing out Moscow's troops. Already one of the Soviet Union's most implacable foes, his successes in Grenada and Afghanistan gave new energy to Reagan's conviction that communism was reversible. Thus was born the Reagan Doctrine, supporting anti-communist movements almost anywhere, with weapons and money, and the moral symbolism which was always part of Ronald Reagan's arsenal.
Freedom is not the sole prerogative of a chosen few. It is the universal right of all God's children.
Reagan was convinced the U.S. had fallen badly behind the Soviets through a decade of military neglect. So he initiated the biggest military buildup in peacetime history, at a cost of more than $1.5 trillion. But after pushing through the largest tax cut in U.S. history, he was stubbornly opposed to raising taxes to pay for the increased defense spending.
His convictions on certain matters are so powerful and so deeply rooted that it just blanks out his willingness to consider facts.
The fact is that the man who sold himself as an enemy of big government and big government spending ran up what was then the largest debt in the nation's history, $2.6 trillion. It took $2 billion a week just to pay the interest. It was his desire to outmaneuver and outdevelop the Soviets that led to one of the most controversial proposals and one of the boldest strokes of the Reagan presidency, the Strategic Defense Initiative, better known as Star Wars.
What if free people could live secure in the knowledge that their security did not rest upon the threat of instant U.S. retaliation to deter a Soviet attack, that we could intercept and destroy strategic ballistic missiles before they reached our own soil or that of our allies?
Would it have ever worked? We don't know. Star Wars research eventually was killed by the Clinton administration. After his landslide election to a second term, Reagan concluded that times had changed. He forged ahead with arms control. In 1987, he signed a treaty with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev that actually reduced the number of nuclear missiles, a first. He held 4 summit meetings with Gorbachev that led to a thaw in U.S.-Soviet relations. He went to Moscow and walked in Red Square with the man he had learned to call my friend. And like a wide-eyed schoolboy, he came back one night to show his wife the sights. But while he was winning high marks for playing peacemaker abroad, at home he was facing the biggest catastrophe of his political career.
We did not, repeat, did not trade weapons or anything else for hostages, nor will we.
It was Ronald Reagan's desire to rescue American hostages being held in the Middle East that provoked the worst crisis of his presidency, the Iran-Contra scandal.
I can't remember just when, in all the calls and meetings and so forth.
Because Reagan delegated authority and distanced himself from details, it was easy to believe he really didn't know that an illegal operation was being carried out literally beneath his feet in the White House basement. Although there are still those who insist he knew exactly what was going on and managed to outfox investigators to the very end. The scheme was to sell arms to Iran in exchange for the release of U.S. hostages in Lebanon.
As my 4th birthday in captivity passes, and as the end of my 4th year approaches, I find it difficult to keep my hopes and my courage high.
Some of the profits from those arms sales were diverted and used to secretly funnel military supplies to Contra rebels in Nicaragua, in defiance of a congressional ban on military aid to the anti-communist rebels. While this scandal continued to haunt members of his administration for years, Ronald Reagan himself made a more or less complete political recovery. What Americans remember about Ronald Reagan is his wit, his charm, and his passion. Teddy Roosevelt called the presidency a bully pulpit. But no one in this television age has preached from it so effectively as this accomplished actor, who became known as the great communicator, whether in a formal address from the Oval Office,
My fellow Americans, thank you for sharing your time with me tonight.
or from a multitude of locations in the field, from the Korean DMZ to the beaches of Normandy on the 40th anniversary of D-Day.
These are the boys of Puente Hope. These are the champions who helped free a continent. And these are the heroes who helped end a war.
When Ronald Reagan spoke, the country listened. When he found a stage from which to make his point, the country watched enthralled. He always played his role appropriate to the setting. He seemed to fit in wherever he went. He had the right touch, whether in the company of the wealthy and powerful abroad or the bereaved and heartbroken at home. His wit not only entertained the nation,
Me? I'm sorry. I would pick one in uniform. He can lick me.
it fueled and cemented America's love affair with Ronald Reagan. To be sure, there were some very awkward moments. When he fell asleep at his first meeting with the Pope, when he was about to make a radio address and he joked into a live microphone that he just outlawed the Soviet Union and the bombing would begin in 5 minutes, when his wife had to coach him on what to say to reporters about getting the Soviets back to the negotiating table,
Doing everything you can.
Doing everything we can.
or when she scolded him for not dressing properly.
Should have worn a raincoat, honey. You should have worn a raincoat.
His infrequent news conferences were often confusing.
The deficit is, or I should say, wait a minute, the spending, I should say, of gross national product. Forgive me.
But even his gaffes seemed to endear him to a public that loved him.
Those were the good days. You know, there was something golden about that period, and so I think he'll always be fondly remembered for those years.
Other men may have performed the job better, but no one played the role of president as well as Ronald Reagan. He left office in 1989 with the highest popularity rating of any retiring president in the history of public opinion polls. And he left with the conviction that the Reagan Revolution had, after all, brought America much closer to being a shining city on a hill.
My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time. We made a difference. We made the city stronger. We made the city freer. And we left her in good hands. All in all, not bad. Not bad at all.